Good evening there, everybody. What is happening? Hopefully, you all are having a wonderful day today. So, when it comes down to it, I thought that I would talk about this little video that I found very particularly interesting. And of course, a lot of the subjects and a lot of the conversations that I have had as of lately, of course, with that boxing talk has consisted of that of Mr. Sewell Canelo Alvarez. And of course, the next fight that we all know that is going to happen with Mr. Canelo Alvarez is going to be that against the very, very decently Russian ranked contender, Mr. Dmitry Bivol. And of course, Dmitry Bivol, or Bivol, however you pronounce it, I believe I'll know he is going to be participating at the 175-pound division. I believe that he has the WBA, official title, not a regular title, not an interim title, but the official WBA title at the light heavyweight division. And I am a personal believer that this fight is a fantastic fight. Now, do I necessarily think that the fight maybe would do over 1 million pay-per-view buys? I'm not quite sure if it's going to do that. But like I said, if you're a person that is a boxing purist or a person like myself that knows what goes on in the sport of boxing consistently, and if you truly do know the degree to which Dmitry Bivol overall to where, basically he should be ranked, you do know that this is a very, very big challenge for Canelo Alvarez. And I had a couple of commentators in my comment section. I had a couple overall who kind of disagreed with me, which of course, we're not always going to agree on everything. It is what it is. I don't necessarily have a problem with certain people overall disagreeing with me. I've never really had a problem with that. But what I will say is this. I think all in all that if we are going to have a debate or a disagreement, that both sides or a certain side overall would have to have a certain amount of evidence on their side. What I will say is this. The channel that we're going to review again today is Mr. Dante's Boxing Nation. And I had one of the commentators in my comment section not too long ago where I believe that he respectfully disagreed with me in that last Canelo Alvarez video. And he said, oh, well, Dante's Boxing Nation, he doesn't talk about Canelo. He speaks facts about Canelo because he just wants him to face A-grade fighters. Because all the fighters before Caleb Plant were pretty much B and C grade fighters. And I don't know if I can just necessarily agree with that. First of all, when it comes down to it, I can't really agree with it for one of two reasons. First of all, when it comes down to it, because I don't think that Billy Joe Saunders, Callum Smith, and Caleb Plant, I don't think that those guys were ever bums. Trust me, when it comes down to it, I know overall the difference overall in terms of standards of fighters. Liam Smith, when Canelo Alvarez fought him, that dude was a B or C grade fighter. That's a guy all in all that was not overall that high grade of a fighter. Avni Yildirim, of course, was not that high grade of a fighter. When you talk about overall someone like, say, a Rocky Fielding, that was someone overall you can debate is a C grade fighter. But when you talk about the undefeated Callum Smith that had a good knockout record, someone who was pretty much a natural light heavyweight, someone who was not only a champion at the super middleweight division, but the Ring Magazine champion. It's not like he was even just pretty much captured a belt overall by some mysterious luck later on, kind of like how Liam Smith had got it at 154. Callum Smith was the legitimate 154-pound champion, and he had knocked out a George Groves that not too long before ended up getting a split decision victory over that of Kershi Bang Jr. Now, whether you want to say that, that is the best one at that point in time, that's up to you. But in my view, Callum Smith was a debatable A-grade fighter at the time, at least on the A- level. Billy Joe Saunders, we all know when it comes down to it, was a very decent opponent because whenever there was conversations about him possibly facing Demetrius Bubo Andrade or someone else of the sort, there was always big news about Billy Joe Saunders possibly facing those guys. And even certain guys like an Aki TV or Dante's Boxing Nation lauded Billy Joe Saunders with a great amount of praise at certain times when they thought that maybe a Jamal Charlo or Demetrius Bubo Andrade versus Billy Joe Saunders fight was going to happen. My point is this. Basically what I'm saying is this. When it came down to Caleb Plant, Callum Smith, and Billy Joe Saunders, if you maybe wanted to make the argument or the case that Jamal Charlo and Demetrius Bubo Andrade and David Benavidez, that those guys are greater athletes and overall, consist of more punching power, I wouldn't necessarily have a problem with that. But the reason why I can't necessarily agree with the commentator's point of view is because when he says, oh, well, Dante, he just wants to see Canelo Alvarez face A-grade fighters. My point being is this. If you overall take a look at Dante's channel consistently enough, you'll actually see all in all that Dante's Boxing Nation, that he truly all along believed that Caleb Plant or Billy Joe Saunders or Callum Smith were A-grade fighters. How do I know that Dante believes that? Because Dante, once upon a time, he basically lauded them with praise when Canelo Alvarez was not facing them. And Dante, even at one point in time, used Billy Joe Saunders' name and used Caleb Plant's name overall to basically criticize that of Canelo Alvarez and say that he was allegedly avoiding them. And he even also said recently that Caleb Plant versus Jamal Charlo, he thought that that would be a very, very big fight. Now, if you're a person, and we just have to take this into perspective, if you're a person that, if you're like a Dante's Box Nation, and if you truly believe that a Jamal Charlo versus Canelo Alvarez fight is a 50-50 fight, and apparently you think that Caleb Plant really had no chance against Canelo Alvarez in the first place, why do you think that Caleb Plant versus Jamal Charlo would be that big of a fight? Wouldn't it overall be Jamal Charlo pretty much either A, facing a Canelo Alvarez leftover, or B, when it comes down to it, facing someone that really is not that high grade? Plus, you can also see another one of my videos not too long ago where I think I said, new media exposed, Canelo Alvarez is the best amidst new media. And you can clearly see, and this is with 100% evidence and proof and empirical data, it cannot be debated, where Aki TV overall states that Canelo at one point in time was avoiding Caleb Plant because he had great athletic ability and great boxing skills. So there is no debate about what new media, what Dante's Boxing Nation, what Aki TV, what a certain amount of these other channels previously thought until Canelo Alvarez beat them. And that overall is a reason why I review these channels. Because these channels, when it comes down to it, they don't keep the same consistent energy. If you were to debate overall the thing of, well, these guys, they just want to see Canelo Alvarez face A-grade fighters. No, they don't want to see Canelo Alvarez face A-grade fighters. They want to see Canelo Alvarez lose. That's what they want. It just is what it is. And I know a certain amount of people, they may disagree with me, but the proof is in the pudding. And like I said, if you don't believe me, take a look at many of my prior videos. You can take a look at it, a certain amount of their videos that they even posted months ago, maybe even to a year ago. When it came down to it, they used to give Billy Joe Saunders and overall Callum Smith and some of these other guys a hell of a lot of praise. But as soon as Canelo Alvarez fought them and beat them, what did they become? They became weak contenders. They became these weak European Caucasian fighters. Just a few videos ago, not too long ago, Dante's Boxing Nation said that there were two fighters that if Canelo Alvarez were to face them, that he would have no chance against them. One of those fighters being Demetrius Bobo Andrade and another fighter being Dimitri Bivol. Well, now that Canelo Alvarez versus Dimitri Bivol is about to happen, we see that Dante's Boxing Nation, that his energy is, like I said it would, when it comes down to it, that it is somewhat changing. And the proof is in the pudding. Because overall, you basically see what he's about to say in this video. Basically, what I'm saying is this. If you're a person that stays on the same hill, and if you're alleging that you believe that Canelo should face some of these guys that are more athletic, or some of these guys that actually have more of a legitimate chance because they have more power when it comes down to it, if you wanted to go on that hill or die on that hill, you can do whatever you want to. I don't necessarily have a problem with that. But if you are going to die on that hill, then you have to be very consistent. So if Canelo Alvarez, when it comes down to it, if he beats out of a Caleb Plant or overall someone like Callum Smith had a lot of power, so I don't know if I want to count him, or someone overall like a Billy Joe Saunders, no problem. Then keep that same energy when it comes down to it for everyone across the board. So if Caleb Plant ends up facing that of a, Jamal Charlo next, don't say that it's a big fight for Jamal Charlo. If you truly believe that Jamal Charlo is a person that really is going to defeat Canelo Alvarez. That's my point here. Because a lot of these guys, they don't keep the same energy. They'll basically say that Canelo Alvarez is facing these quote-unquote bums, but then as soon as Canelo Alvarez, as soon as he goes on to face, as soon as these guys maybe go on to face a Jamal Charlo or Demetrius Bobo Andrade, they basically say, oh, well, this would be a big fight. This would be a great fight. How come you didn't say that for Canelo Alvarez? Because you allegedly believe that Canelo Alvarez is not even top 5 pound for pound. So overall, why are you alleging these things? Because they're full of shit. It just is what it is. It's no offense overall to Dante's Boxing Nation, but I can tell someone that truly believes in what they're saying, and I can tell someone overall who is trying to fool the public. And Dante's Boxing Nation, there's no offense against him, he's trying to fool the public. He is a shill. It is what it is. And we're going to see that once again in this video. But anyways, let's get straight to it. Let's see what he has to say.
Dante's Boxing Nation, what's going on, guys? So it's official, you guys all know by now that Canelo Alvarez has signed to fight Dimitri Bivol. It's also official that he has a multi-fight deal with DAZN and Matchroom, which includes a Golovkin fight, and the third fight is either going to be against Macaboo or John Ryder. Now, the interesting thing about this multi-fight deal is before Canelo can even get to the easiest fight, he has to take on the most difficult fight out of the 3 or 4 options, which is against Bivol. Speaking of Bivol, he responded to this announcement, and this is what he said. He said, I always wanted to fight the best. I believe that the rest of my goals will begin to materialize on May 7th. So as you guys can see clearly, Bivol, he's not a big talker. He's not going to be talking about beating Canelo's ass, etc., etc. But don't let that fool you. Dimitri Bivol will definitely be Canelo Alvarez's most dangerous opponent in the last 4 years. The last time.
I agree all in all that he will be, but it's not because all in all that Canelo Alvarez just hasn't fought decent competition like many of these channels try to allege. Because once again, when you talk about Callum Smith, Caleb Plant, and Billy Joe Saunders, once again, if Jamal Charlo or David Benavidez or Demetrius Bubo Andrade, if any one of these fighters that ended up getting a victory over them, they'd be basically saying that that's an A-grade win in their career. The only reason why they're saying that that's not an A-grade win is because Canelo is the bigger threat. He's the person overall with the bigger brand. So it is what it is. All right? It's kind of similar overall to kind of like that with that of the UFC or maybe with football or basketball. You know what I mean? Basically, when Stephen Curry, when he beats an injured team when it comes down to it, like the Cleveland Cavaliers all the way back when Kyrie Irving and Kevin Love weren't there, they basically say, oh, well, Stephen Curry, he didn't really win that ring overall legitimately and blah, blah, blah when it comes down to it. But then Kawhi Leonard does it against the Golden State Warriors in 2019, and they basically give him all the credit in the world. The reason why that is because Stephen Curry was looked at as the bigger threat to LeBron James. It just is what it is. But as soon as Kawhi Leonard became that big threat to LeBron James, you notice that many people started tearing him down as well. So it's all about how big of a threat you are, how much power you have. And right now, Canelo has all the power. As I said, and as I've said many times, heavy is the head that wears the crown.
Golovkin was in a fight.
But just to talk about Dimitri Bivol certainly is going to be Canelo Alvarez's toughest test, probably within about 4 years. It's not that Danny Jacobs, Caleb Plant, Callum Smith, Billy Joe Saunders were not very, very good opponents. But at the end of the day, I think that Dimitri Bivol is on another level. I think that he's a great athlete. He has very, very good power. He has very good, hand speed. He has very good foot movement when it comes down to it. He's an excellent fighter. The only thing I would say is that maybe his body attack is maybe not what it should be, but almost everything else, he's in pretty good tip-top shape. So we'll see what happens.
That was this dangerous is when he fought Golovkin in the rematch. Now, it's pretty interesting because I definitely thought that Canelo Alvarez, he would pick Charlo, especially after Charlo's last performance. But apparently Canelo, he believes that Bivol will be an easier fight because Canelo Alvarez has fought so many European.
So basically what is Dante's Boxing Nation trying to say here? Like I said, it's a difference if you're always going on the narrative and you're saying, well, you know what, Canelo Alvarez, he faces these guys that don't have athleticism and this and this and this. But it's completely different if you're doing what Dante's Boxing Nation does. Basically, what does Dante's Boxing Nation do? Whoever he fights, what does he say? Always fighting him off a bad performance. Always fighting him off of this. Always fighting him off of that. Always fighting another European style. Always doing this. Like I said, with Dante's Boxing Nation, there's always some other excuse. But yet with other boxers, when it comes down to it, and, this is how no offense to the dude when it comes down to it, but I have to respectfully disagree. He said in my comment section, he said, oh, well, Dante, he's just speaking the facts against Canelo when it comes down to it because blah, blah, blah. No, sir, I'm sorry, I just can't agree. And you know how I know that Dante's Boxing Nation has something against Canelo Alvarez and how he wouldn't speak out against other fighters like that? Because he has no problem with Gervonta Tank Davis, who in my opinion is a very high-grade fighter, facing someone like overall the Rolly Romero or an Isaac Pitbull Cruz, someone that he tries to basically spin that around, people who have never even won legitimate titles in their career, and he basically tries to spin that around and say that Gervonta Tank Davis is beating way greater competition than Canelo Alvarez. How can you even really truly seriously say that? I mean, that's just idiotic. It just is what it is. That's how you know that Dante's Boxing Nation is no offense against the dude, but the dude's a politician. He's trying to fool the public. It is what it is. He's going on over all this spam bullshit when it comes out, or overall, this bullshit narrative. I'm sorry, like I said, I can tell a person overall who truly believes in what they say and a person that is just trying to fool the public. And no offense against Dante, but he ain't fooling me. It is what it is. He is clearly trying to fool the public with this bullshit narrative because he don't want Canelo Alvarez to be the number one pound-for-pound fighter. It just is what it is.
/white fighters. He's gotten used to their style, and he believes he can walk all.
You see that? So basically, Dante, he gave Canelo Alvarez a backhanded compliment. He said, yes, it's a good thing that he's taken this fight, but how much credit can we really give him really because Dimitri Bivol is just another European-style fighter. Now, if you want to stick to that narrative when it comes down to it, that's cool. I'm not going to overall stick to that narrative because, like I said, at the end of the day, I'm sorry, but Jamal Charlo and David Benavidez, they're nowhere near the fighter that a Dimitri Bivol is. It just is what it is. And I know a certain amount of people that disagree with me. Oh, well, Charlo and David Benavidez, they have these American styles. Yes, but they're not fully Mayweather. It just is what it is. They're not Floyd Mayweather. They're not Shakur Stevenson. They're not they're not Terrence Bud Crawford. They're not Errol Spence Jr. They're not on those guys' level. They're very decent fighters. They're very good fighters. But they're pretty much no higher than what a prime Danny Jacobs was. To be honest with you, they're not even as good as what a prime Gennady Golovkin was. They don't even bring to the table what he does. Now, of course, that's just my assessment. Who knows? Maybe Jamal Charlo and David Benavidez get in the ring with Canelo Alvarez. Maybe they beat him. I don't know. I highly doubt it. But at the end of the day, like I said, I'm sorry, but I can't criticize Canelo Alvarez too much for going after Dimitri Bivol, someone that has a very good amateur pedigree and a very good Olympic background. Someone overall that is undefeated, probably one of my top 15 to top 20 pound-for-pound fighters in the world right now when it comes down to it. And on top of that, someone that I know can box. I'm sorry, but even the best version of Jamal Charlo or David Benavidez that I've ever seen, there's just never been a performance by them to where I've been like, wow, that dude all in all has a real chance against Canelo Alvarez. Name me one performance by either David Benavidez or overall Jamal Charlo to where you legitimately thought that they could beat the best version of Canelo Alvarez. Name me one. You can't name me one. It just is what it is. What performance did you see in David Benavidez' career? Now, of course, other people may say, well, would you say the same thing about Caleb Plant or Billy Joe Saunders? No, I wouldn't necessarily say that, but my point being is that Jamal Charlo, in my opinion, he's pretty much on the same level as those guys. It is what it is. Some would even debate that David Benavidez is, but the main thing that may separate that of a David Benavidez is just that he's naturally bigger. So, a certain amount bigger. So it just is what it is. But even David Benavidez, there's never been a performance in his career where I've taken a look at it and I said, wow, that performance, against a decent fighter to where I said, wow, that dude is really going to beat Canelo. I'm sorry, I've just never seen it. Dimitri Bivol, you can at least say that there's a few performances in his career over decent fighters. Fighters that were actually once upon a time very high contenders or legitimate champions when it came down to like Jean Pascal. Jean Pascal, he's not going to be remembered as someone that was ever a top 10 pound-for-pound fighter. But Dimitri Bivol was able to completely embarrass him. And unless you were the creme de la creme, you were not going to beat Jean Pascal. Look at him recently. He ended up getting a win over Marcus Brown and Badu Jack. I'm sure he had a little bit of extras, supplements when it came down to it, a little bit of extra help in more recent news, Steroids basically is what I'm alleging, but at the end of the day, he was able to get those victories. So it is what it is. So Dimitri Bivol was able to embarrass Jean Pascal. He was able to embarrass Joe Smith Jr. He was able to embarrass and knock out Sullivan Barrera. And there may even be a couple of other names that I'm not personally mentioning. I'm sorry, but when I take a look at Jamal Charlo and David Benavidez, I've never seen them have such impressive performances in their career the same way that Dimitri Bivol has. I'm sorry, it's just never happened. Even when you take a look at Jamal Charlo versus Sergey Derevyanchenko, that was the best performance in his career. Even if you take a look at that fight, you can see how vulnerable he is to getting hit. It just is what it is. I'm sorry, but if we legitimately look at this logically and objectively, and I am a person that looks at things logically and objectively. I'm not a person that just says I look at things logically and objectively. I look at things very logically and very objectively. When we take a look at the dimensions of both fighters, if we were to compare David Benavidez and Dimitri Bivol, or Jamal Charlo and Dimitri Bivol, name me one category that Jamal Charlo or David Benavidez beat Dimitri Bivol in. You can't name me one. You can't name me one. I don't even know if they personally beat Dimitri Bivol in punching power. David Benavidez said that he sparred with Dimitri Bivol and that, sure, Dimitri Bivol, he's not a person that has the same knockout ratio as a Gennady Golovkin per se. But people who have sparred him, they've said basically that he pretty much punches just as hard as that of a Gennady Golovkin. Now, whether that's true or not, that's up to you. There are certain boxers that, like a Shane Mosley, they thought that Floyd Mayweather Jr. punched just as hard as Canelo Alvarez. So it's up to you whether you believe that or not. But at the end of the day, we all know Dimitri Bivol, at least at his best, can somewhat punch. We all know that. All right, he's a very decent puncher. On top of that, he has better hand speed. On top of that, he has better footwork than both Jamal Charlo and David Benavidez. On top of that, he has higher boxing IQ. On top of that, when it comes down to it, he has better footwork, better foot speed. When it comes down to it, he has better head movement. He has better defense, in my opinion. There's basically no categories, overall that David Benavidez or Jamal Charlo really beat Dimitri Bivol in. There's not really one category. If you're a person that truly believes, and if you're watching this video, and if you truly believe that Jamal Charlo and David Benavidez, if you truly believe that they are better opponents in terms of more of a challenge to Canelo Alvarez, tell me what specifically they beat, Dimitri Bivol in terms of categories. Because I'm not talking about just overall, the eye test or overall American styles or all this bullshit. Tell me what you've seen them do in certain performances against certain fighters, and you tell me to watch these certain fights when it comes down to it, because I've seen all their fights basically when it comes down to it, and you tell me what categories they beat Dimitri Bivol in. Because I've seen several of Dimitri Bivol's performances. I've also seen several of Charlo's and Benavidez's. I'm sorry, but Benavidez and Charlo, they don't have enough head movement. They don't have enough of a defense. They're very decent fighters. They're very entertaining fighters, but they're not on the same pedigree level as the Dimitri Bivol, not even close. And if you're a person that looks at things logically and objectively and has somewhat of a sense of realism, you would probably know that. It just is what it is.
Them down. He believes they're uncomfortable on the inside. Once he lands punches to the body, that's when he starts to take the air out of the tires. And eventually, he will get him out of there towards the fourth quarter of the fight. This is what he's banking on when it comes to Bivol. When it comes to Charlo, I had someone send me a comment in my comment section in the last video I did, and he said, I disagree with you. I don't believe that Bivol is an easier fight than Charlo. First of all, I never said that Bivol was easier. I said that Canelo feels that Bivol is easier. Now, this is what it...
Right, but come on, Dante. That's basically your backhanded way of trying to criticize Canelo Alvarez. Like, come on. Are you going to give the dude credit or not? I mean, obviously not, and I pretty much predicted that. Let me overall quote my boy Ego here. Ego Stradamus strikes again. Overall, just like how he would say. But when it comes down to it, all in all, like I said, I pretty much knew that this was going to happen. Like I said many, many times, these channels are not going to give Canelo credit because their problem with him is that they don't want someone like that as the number one pound-for-pound fighter. Because they basically take a look at Canelo Alvarez and they say the only reason why this dude's ranked as the number one pound-for-pound fighter is because he has the complexion for the protection. How can we tear down this dude? How can we basically get this guy not at the number one pound-for-pound spot? That's their only objective. They don't. If Canelo was a black fighter, they would treat him completely differently. There's no doubt about it. There's no doubt about it.
Comes down to if you're comparing Canelo or you're comparing Charlo to Bivol as an opponent for Canelo. If we're talking about the Charlo that fought Fernando Montiel, then that will definitely be an easier fight than the Bivol fight. If we're talking about a Jamal Charlo...
Let me also bring that up because there's been a few people in my comment section that said, oh, well, stop hyping up Dimitri Bivol. Well, there's no hyping up about it. It's just telling the truth. Now, if I was saying that Dimitri Bivol is the next Floyd Mayweather Jr. or something like that, then okay, yeah, that's something a little bit understandable. Or, he's the next Manny Pacquiao, then of course that's something a little bit understandable. Then I would be hyping him up a little bit out of proportion. But just saying over what I've said about him, what have I said necessarily that has hyped him up to an unrealistic degree? He is a better fighter than Charlo. He is a better fighter than David Benavidez. And no offense, but if you probably don't see that, it's probably because you don't know that much about boxing. It just is what it is.
If fought Sergey Derevyanchenko or even Julian J. Rock Williams, then Charlo would be the most difficult fight.
So basically what did Dante's Boxing Nation just say? Basically what he said is that if Canelo Alvarez faces Jamal Charlo at his best, Jamal Charlo is going to be more difficult than that of a Dimitri Bivol. So basically his energy has already changed up. That's basically what he said. But Dante, once again, you should have no problem with this fight occurring because Jamal Charlo apparently had the worst performance of his career last time, so he overall needs to improve as well. But like I said, let me also say this as well. Because one of the guys overall said, Dimitri Bivol, his last several fights, he's went to a decision with C-grade fighters. You could argue that. I don't necessarily think that that's the worst point. But let's not sit here and act like David Benavidez or Jamal Charlo that overall they just knock out every single fighter that they're in the ring with. Now, David Benavidez, technically has within his past few fights. But let's be real. Has he been knocking out real A-grade fighters? Or has he been knocking out pretty much the bottom of the barrel opponents? It just is what it is. Don't get me wrong. I like David Benavidez. I think that it's a great fight. But let's not sit here and act like David Benavidez that, he just has a victory in his career that really stands him or puts him apart in terms of boxing pedigree over Dimitri Bivol, because he does not. Dimitri Bivol has the better resume, and it's not even close. It just is what it is. Now, once again, if you're talking about in terms of a monetary perspective, in terms of money, because David Benavidez is not only, from Mexican descent overall, but he's also an American fighter, a Mexican-American fighter. Yeah, of course, the fight probably would do more numbers when it comes down to it. But at the end of the day, when we actually take a look at it, and for those of us that actually know shit about boxing, if we take a look at Benavidez and Dimitri Bivol side by side, there's no question about who the better boxer is. It just is what it is. And even if you take a look at Jamal Charlo in his best performances, you can take a look even at the Sergey Derevyanchenko fight. Even in that fight, he's still way too hittable. Even in Jamal Charlo's best performances of his career, where overall he fought Julian J. Rock Williams and overall Sergey Derevyanchenko. He never overall has looked overtly impressive. I'm sorry, he just hasn't. It is what it is. When you take a look at each and every single one of Jamal Charlo's fights, he looks way too hittable. When it comes down to it, he has a very leaky defense. He's way too straightforward. He's not always a fighter overall that has enough of volume punches, meaning that he doesn't always throw as much as what he needs to. He has a very big problem with certain slick fighters and their counter-punching abilities. If you don't believe me, take a look at his Austin Trout performances and his Matt Korobov performances. I'm sorry, but I can't sit here and tell you legitimately, with 100% belief that Jamal Charlo, in my view, is the more dangerous fight than Dimitri Bivol. I don't think that it is. And I think that if Jamal Charlo and Dimitri Bivol, if they were to get in the same ring, I think Dimitri Bivol, if he was at his best, even if he was off that night, I think Dimitri Bivol would have Jamal Charlo for a good steak dinner. It just is what it is. I think that he'd cook him up.
Explain to you guys, I feel Canelo Alvarez, he looked at it that way. He said to himself, sure, Charlo, he looked bad in his last fight against...
So basically, what is that you saying, Dante? I'm not going to give Canelo Alvarez credit. I'm not going to give him credit. And this is why I have to respectfully disagree with that one commentator who commented in my comment section. Because these guys, they may take a look at Dante's channel and they may say, and this is why I review these channels, they may sit here and say, oh, well, Dante's Boxing Nation, when it comes down, he's just speaking facts. He wants Canelo Alvarez to face better opponents. So why does he get after Canelo Alvarez for facing actually legitimate champions? But then Gervonta Tank Davis, basically, he won't get after him when it comes down to when he faces Isaac Pitbull Cruz or Rolly Romero. Two people all in all that clearly are not the creme de la creme or the cream of the crop. Let's be real. All right. And on top of that, when it comes down to, like I said, he changes his energy constantly. You can see it in the majority of his videos. All right. I'm sorry, but no, you can tell that Dante's Boxing Nation, he has a problem with Canelo Alvarez. All right. It is what it is.
It's Montiel. But what if the best version of Charlo shows up the night that I fight him? Which is extremely possible.
And basically, overall, what Dante said, if Canelo possibly was going to face Jamal Charlo next, what did he say? Oh, well, the best version of Jamal Charlo might not show up. But now that Canelo was not facing Jamal Charlo, what is he saying? Oh, well, the reason why he probably didn't take that fight is because, the best version of Jamal Charlo might have showed up. So, which is it, Dante? Are you happy that he took the Dimitri Bivol fight or not? That's why I'm saying I can't respect a channel like this because Dante does not even have a legitimate opinion. He's basically going to change his opinion and slither around overall basically to make Canelo Alvarez look bad no matter what. And this is not a fanboy channel. I am not a fan of Canelo Alvarez. I am not a fan of any of these fighters. But I can very clearly see when someone's up to that bullshit. And no offense against Dante, but I'm getting a very, very high detection overall of some bullshit around here. It just is what it is. Anyway.
Another reason we know that Canelo does not feel that Charlo is an easier fight than Bivol is because Canelo Alvarez, he could have fought Charlo back at 154 when Charlo was the junior middleweight champion and Charlo had just came off of the biggest win of his career, knocking out the undefeated mandatory Julian J. Rock Williams. That would have been a perfect time for Canelo to take that fight. In fact, Charlo was calling out Canelo after he got that win.
Like I said, there are certain examples of fighters that they will go up to a higher weight class and make that excuse and basically say all in all that I'm going to face a bigger challenge or I'm going to try to make, myself great, like when Mikey Garcia or Gervonta Tank Davis pulled that bullshit. Like instead of facing Vasily Lomachenko at their own weight class, they fought either a Mario Barrios, who wasn't shit, or they fought a Sergey Lipinets, who wasn't shit. Those are examples of fighters that they pretty much won a belt or even a regular belt because they were lucky enough to get one. But Callum Smith, Caleb Plant, and Billy Joe Saunders, those are not fighters that were just lucky belt winners. Those are fighters that they ended up winning a belt because they got a few good wins in their career. Billy Joe Saunders ended up beating David Lemieux. He ended up beating overall Christian Bank Jr. He ended up defeating Andy Lee. A couple of those fighters were former champions when it came down to it. Callum Smith, for example, knocked out George Groves. Now, it was a little bit of a more washed, I'm not going to say washed, but worn down version of George Groves if you wanted to argue that. But at the end of the day, it was a George Groves that not too long ago had a victory over Christian Bank Jr. Then Callum Smith later on fought him. He ended up getting the knockout within the middle rounds. Also ended up defeating Rocky Fielding, if you think that's worth anything. All in all, he ended up defeating him within, I believe, the first round. So Callum Smith was just not some bum of a fighter when it comes down to it. Same with Caleb Plant. Caleb Plant ended up getting a victory over two former champions. Caleb Truax, who in my opinion is not really a Hall of Famer. He's not a person that is a great champion, but at least he overall ended up getting one win over the great fighter, recent fighter James DeGale. And on top of that, he ended up defeating Jose Uzcategui, who ended up getting a decent victory, I guess, over Andre Durrell when it came down to it. Caleb Plant ended up dominating him. So these fighters, if you're trying to spread the narrative that these fighters were just bum of the month club, no, I'm sorry, I can't allege that. It just is what it is. Now, if you want to talk about Isaac Pitbull Cruz, who basically has won no official belts in his career, or Willie Romero, who has no big wins in his career and won none of the official belts in his career, or if you want to talk about Yuriorkis Gamboa at this point in time, because he has no chance of basically winning a regular belt or an official belt in any weight class, or a Kelbrook at this point in time because he has no chance of winning a belt in any weight class at this point in time, an official belt, then yes, you have a point. But if you're talking about a fighter that can actually win a belt, an official belt, one of the four main belts in a weight class, no, I'm sorry, that's not just some bum of a fighter. It is what it is. Anyway.
Canelo Alvarez, he decides to move up to 160 instead of trying to unify the belts where Andrade and Charlo were the champions, or actually Andrade and the Charlo brothers were the champions. Canelo moves up to 160, then Charlo becomes his mandatory. And Canelo still doesn't fight him. So clearly, Canelo Alvarez, he sees something really, really special in Jermall Charlo. And the difference...
I think what Canelo Alvarez sees in Jermall Charlo is the same thing that I see, which is that he's a great victory, but I don't think overall that he's scared of Jermall Charlo. I don't think that he fears him whatsoever. I could be wrong, but I just highly doubt it. But I think Canelo Alvarez, what he realizes is that eventually, if he is going to be in that top 10 conversation, which he very much could climb into, he's more than likely going to have to beat the guys at 175. And I think that both of those fights would be fantastic fights, because more than likely he's going to have to face Dmitry Bivol and Artur Beterbiev. And of course, that's not including the Gennady Golovkin fight that'll happen later on this year, and more than likely, who knows, the Ilunga Makabu fight, which I think would be great for a third fight to cap off the year. But we'll see what happens.
From a Jermall, the best Jermall versus the best Bivol is Jermall Charlo. Not only can he fight at a distance, he's also comfortable fighting on the inside. As we see.
Right, but Dmitry Bivol can fight a little bit on the inside as well. And I'm sorry, but Dmitry Bivol, even though he prefers to be on the outside a little bit and prefers to keep a little bit of distance, I'm sorry, that version of Dmitry Bivol, even if he only can fight on the outside, is better than both dimensions combined of Jermall Charlo. It just is what it is. Because that version of Dmitry Bivol, even if he couldn't fight on the inside very well, and he can actually fight on the inside very well. You can see that in his fights against Joe Smith Jr. and a few others. That's not me saying that he's necessarily, going to go at you Antonio Margarito style or anything like that. But let's be real. Come on. Let's not try to play games here. Now Dante's basically already trying to change his energy. Dmitry Bivol, when it comes down to it, he can fight a little bit on the inside. That's not me saying overall that he's a Miguel Cotto or a Manny Pacquiao or anything. But when it comes down at the end of the day, Dmitry Bivol, he can fight a little bit on the inside. He does prefer to keep his distance usually, but you can tell that Dmitry Bivol at his best, he is a legitimate A-grade fighter. A legitimate, very high pedigree fighter.
In the Derevyanchenko fight. But don't just...
And I'm sorry, but Jermall Charlo, he does not even overall fight that well on the inside. Go ahead and take a look at his fights overall against Julian J. Rock Williams and Matt Korobov. Now, Matt Korobov, he usually kept him a little bit more at a distance when it came down to it. But even fighters all in all that get on the inside with Jermall Charlo, I'm sorry, but there's just never been any performance in Jermall Charlo's career where I've really taken a look at him and I said, oh my God, that dude is going to beat Canelo, he's going to beat Andre, he's going to beat every other one of these contenders. I'm sorry, I've just never seen it.
Take my word for it when I tell you that Canelo...
Now, I could be wrong, but at the end of the day, I've never overall seen what they've seen in Jermall Charlo. I've never seen it. I've never seen it.
He believes that Charlo is a very special fighter because Canelo's own trainer, he called Jermall Charlo a spectacular fighter. And outside of Floyd Mayweather, Canelo's team has never said this about any potential opponents.
Right, but this is the problem with a lot of channels, and this is the problem also with Dante. Jermall Charlo is not Floyd Mayweather. He's not Floyd Mayweather. Not even close. Floyd Mayweather, comparing Floyd Mayweather and Jermall Charlo is like, in my opinion, comparing Tom Brady with a quarterback almost like Aaron Rodgers. Now, I don't even know if I want to make it that comparison because Aaron Rodgers is so gifted and naturally talented for his position. But the reason why I say it's like that comparison is because it's really not even a conversation. Just when you talk about it in terms of greatness. Now, skill, of course, that's a different conversation. But talking about Floyd Mayweather Jr. and Jermall Charlo, I mean, I don't even know what to compare that to. That would almost be like comparing like Michael Jordan and like John Wall. It just is what it is. Or like Michael Jordan and Russell Westbrook. You know, like Michael Jordan, like you can't even compare those guys to him.
For Canelo Alvarez, but they said this about Jamal Charlo. In fact, let me quote exactly what he said. So this is what Canelo Alvarez's trainer said when he was asked about a potential fight against Jamal Charlo. He said Canelo versus Charlo is a good fight. Charlo has a lot of qualities. He's spectacular, tall for the division, strong, and he has good boxing skills. So like I told you guys before, Canelo Alvarez and his team, they realize that that spectacular version of Jamal Charlo may end up showing up when it comes to the Canelo Alvarez fight. Now, don't get me.
Well, I think all in all that they're interested in the fight, and I think that they think that Jamal Charlo was good. But do I think that they actually believe that he's as good as the Floyd Mayweather Jr. or as spectacular? No, I do not. No, I do not. Because there's never been a performance in Jamal Charlo's career where he's looked spectacular to me. I'm sorry, there just never has been. Never, not once.
Wrong, the Bivol fight is still a difficult fight because it's an upgrade from a yield.
It's not even just a difficult fight, Dante. It's a much more difficult fight than what the Jamal Charlo fight would have been several years ago. It's a more difficult fight than what the Jamal Charlo fight would be tomorrow. It's a more difficult fight than what the Jamal Charlo fight would be a couple years later on down the line. At least that's just my opinion on it. Now, I could be 100% wrong. Do I think that I'm going to be? No, absolutely not. That's not me saying that I'm not wrong here and there. But I know overall the qualities of a boxer when I see him. I'm not usually overall tending to be wrong on those. It just is what it is. And it's no offense against Dante, but this is not a dude overall with the highest of boxing IQ. That's why all in all, he predicted the same stupid shit like a lot of these other channels did with the Tyson Fury Deontay Wilder situation when it comes down to he said the same shit about the Canelo overall Caleb Plant situation. This dude has made so many dumb overall predictions and so many overall dumb things. Or he's just said so many dipshit things.
A Rocky Field in a Caleb Plant or a Billy Joe Saunders. This is a real fight. This will be another fight where Canelo will be getting outboxed. He'll be losing a lot of the earlier rounds. And he's once again going to be banking on walking down and catching up with Bill.
Right, but which fights are you talking about, dude? Like, which fight specifically is Canelo Alvarez truly losing? Like, don't get me wrong, that's not me saying that Canelo Alvarez just never loses rounds. But Dante, every single fight that Canelo Alvarez has, he always tries to act like Canelo Alvarez. Like I said, he tries to act like he's some Deontay Wilder or some shit. He tries to act like overall Canelo Alvarez that he looks like Deontay Wilder in the Tyson Fury fights. Like, come on, dude. Canelo Alvarez is not getting completely outboxed by these guys. He may get overall outboxed for a couple rounds, or there may be a couple rounds that he loses. But at the end of the day, when you talk about him versus Billy Joe Saunders, or him versus Caleb Plant or Sergey Kovalev, he was winning those fights, even before he stopped them. So it is what it is.
In the later rounds.
Now, the big question is, overall, will he be able to win on points against Dimitri Bivol? More than likely, because not only does Canelo Alvarez usually get the nod from the decisions, whether it be just or unjust, it just is what it is. But when it comes down at the end of the day, I think that more than likely Canelo Alvarez, I do think that he is the all-around more skilled fighter than that of Dimitri Bivol. But we'll see what happens, because Bivol is a very highly skilled fighter. He is nothing to mess around with.
The question is, will he be able to do it with this caliber of an opponent? A fighter who has unbelievable angles and a great jab. Once again, he may not be an inside fighter, but he makes up for it when he controls.
He's a better fighter on the inside than what you give him credit for. But it is what it is. But I will say this, Dimitri Bivol's body attack is going to have to be better in this fight. But we'll see, I don't know what happens.
Range. So we'll see how it plays out.
But like I said, as you can see, Dante is already making excuses. He has several in ploy.
That's all I got for now, guys. I'm on to the next one. All right, now check this out, guys. If you look.
But anyways, that's really about it for today. I just thought that I would talk about that because I thought it was very particularly interesting. But we'll see all in all what we can talk about later on. Anyways, that's really about it for today. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll talk to you all later.